Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.
All right, well, it's time to demystify America now, or at least the United States. Richard Kazimer is our correspondent in the United States. Welcome for the first time, Richard.
Thank you very much.
And a big job to do when I say demystifying the United States, because I've been to the United States 2, maybe 3 times, and each time the immigration officials were very rude to me, and I thought, why would I want to go on holiday here when there's such a welcome? But it is a mystifying place for a lot of people. Even though a lot of people say Australia is just like the States, I don't think it is, and a lot of people just don't get Americans.
What is mystifying about it? Is it when I say your, I mean the broad brush Australians' perception of it, or have you seen this with other nationalities or other international folks who share the same concern?
Oh, I think the rest of the world. I think it's you against the rest of the world is what I reckon. But anyway, look, we'll explain, we'll examine that as we talk over coming weeks. But let's talk politics, because of course that's I'm led to believe that's what people talk about all the time in America when they're not talking about the Super Bowl. And Barack Obama. So Barack Obama seems to be. Is he popular still? He seems to be getting he seems to be trying to do a lot, but at the same time, he's fighting Congress. He seems to be fighting a tide of opinion. So we look, for example, at his attempt, and he's trying to do a lot of things as well. He's certainly a reformer, isn't he? So he's trying to raise the standard for against carbon pollution, for example. He's trying to get this regulation through by at least to get the Environmental Protection Agency to draft a regulation that's going to change the national standard for carbon pollution. He's aiming to do that by the middle of the year. And then, of course, he's trying to raise the minimum wage. Then, of course, you've got Obamacare as well. There's an awful lot that he's trying to push forward on a reform agenda. Is he going to pull any of it off?
He will, some of it. He has a lot more than previous presidents. He is probably the hardest working president this country has seen in probably a couple of 100 years. He is an amazing man, and I think that getting back to his poll numbers are below 50%, which is not a good thing. But when you look at what this man has had to face in opposition for the past, going on 1.5 terms now, is amazing, and at the other end, pretty much disgusting, because he has had to face total opposition for the simple reason by the Republican-held Congress. We have 2 houses here, the House and the Senate, the House being the Congress, which is run by Republicans, as they have opposed every single thing that he proposes.
Right. On ideological grounds, or just because they actually oppose the idea, or just because they can oppose it?
Both. The idea being, for example, regulation for safety, regulation for mining and for industry, that the Republicans do not want to have any regulation at all. Increasing the minimum wage, the Republicans would rather have, and I think the national minimum wage is $7.35 an hour. Barack Obama wants to raise it to like $10 an hour. The Republicans are opposed to that because they feel that no business should be regulated and no business should be told what the minimum is that they should pay their employees. Republicans have even proposed to do away with the minimum wage altogether, that if people want to work or can only work for $1 an hour, an employer should be able to pay that.
Until they get too weak, of course. And
then you get another one.
And then you get another one.
Yes.
Absolutely, that's right.
The same thing.
These people only work for us for a week, and then they collapse.
Exactly.
But that's fine. But I mean, surely the economics here, surely these people would want to look at the macroeconomic level and say, well, look, if you've got a lot of poor poor people, they don't spend money, therefore they don't buy products, therefore the economy doesn't do very well, versus, well, actually, if we make sure that the lower income part of society has a little bit more money, then they're going to be prepared to spend more, therefore that helps prop up the economy? Or does that kind of argument that doesn't hold any weight with them?
No, not at all, because they want the haves and the have-nots. They want rich people to control all of the money, and they want the poor people to stay poor and not get into a position where they will compete with, to build their own businesses and be in competition, or getting sort of free health care or affordable health care. If you can't afford your own health care, you deserve to die. That's the way the Republicans think.
Now that interests me, because this sort of strikes close to home, because my father-in-law, who was born in America, has lived in Australia for a long time, is in intensive care, looks like he's going to be in intensive care for a long time. We think he's going to pull through, but it's going to take a lot of work. He's not a particularly wealthy man. It's all being paid for by the state. If he was in the United States, he didn't have a lot of money, wasn't able to put money into healthcare, what would have happened to him?
He would have died.
Right.
Plain and simple.
Pure and simple.
If you do not have health care, if you do not have insurance to pay for your health care, you do not get treated. Now, you can go to the emergency room for, emergency. If you have a heart attack or you get hit by a car or whatever, you go to the emergency room and the hospitals are obligated to fix you or to get you to the point where you can leave the hospital or someone come and pick you up. You will be billed. If you can't pay for it, they will come after you with a collection agency. But if you don't have insurance, you cannot go to the hospital or go to your doctor and get fixed unless you can pay cash. That's the way it works. You either have insurance that you pay for or is supplemented by your employer, or you pay cash. And how you get the cash is your business. But that's the way it is. So
how I said at the beginning, a lot of people are confused, and you're here to demystify America. That's the sort of thing that confuses most people in the civilized world. That you would,
exactly.
I mean, that makes no sense. So let's have a look at another area though that Obama seems to be moving forward on. Trying to set this national standard for carbon pollution. In Australia would say that's just such an outdated notion, I mean, the idea of that looking at trying to fix climate change, because obviously here in Australia, climate change is crap. Pollution is the way forward. We need more of it. That's what's best for the world. But your president has other ideas, which I find is interesting, because here we have the center of unfettered capitalism in the United States. And here we have a president who's actually trying to tackle one of the biggest issues that society faces. I mean, has he taken on too much? Is he going to be able to do this?
Every president does something for the environment, whether it's emission control standards for cars, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, things like that. So every president tries to do something during their term in office. But and I'm not saying that this is Barack Obama is doing the same thing, but there's just so much a president can do, because these are all long-term effects. So if a president puts some sort of reform in place, they're looking at 15, 20, 40 years down the road for the result. So I'm not saying it's ineffective, but these things are not immediate. So if you sign into legislation, a Clean Air Act, or restrictions on emissions, you're not going to see that changeover, that retooling. Let's say if it's the auto emissions, for example, they'll give the car manufacturers a decade to get everything retooled. But by that time, the president is long out of office.
But it's still progress, though. It doesn't get changed back. You don't get a change in government and somebody says, right, well, that was a bad idea. Let's retract this legislation and do something that's worse for the environment. That's not happening. So far.
Actually, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, is the agency that's supposed to monitor everything that goes on. Now, we've got an example here. A couple of weeks ago in West Virginia, a chemical plant had a leak and poured this toxic chemical into the river. And the residents in West Virginia still cannot drink the drinking water down there, even though the Centers for Disease Control came out and said, "Oh yeah, it's okay, you can drink it." Or some agency said, "Oh yeah, it's okay to drink," and the people drank it, a few days later and started getting all these rashes and stuff. What the EPA did, though, is they went in there into this plant one time and only checked out to see if the holding bins were up to code, and not the actual chemical, because the chemical that they were holding had no research done for the physical effects against the humans. So the Environmental Protection Agency and other agencies agencies like that are pretty much handcuffed to what it is and a little benign in what it is that they do. Some states have stronger environmental protections than the actual national codes and other laws that are in effect. When I was growing up, I grew up in Maine, which is in the northeasternmost part of the United States. We used to get pollution. This is back in the 50s and 60s, pollution from the Midwest states, these huge plants that had these 200-foot high smokestacks, and it would blow all the way up the East Coast. Because of that, individual states can sue other states for pollution. And I think that's where the effectiveness comes in as opposed to a national standard. I don't know if I've answered your question, but there are states that actually will go after legally other states to curb their pollution.
Hey, do you know what I love about that is because I mean, clearly the economic argument against pollution is that, half the time people are polluting without having any charge for it. That's why I thought the idea of having a carbon tax in Australia was a good idea, because if you're pushing stuff into the atmosphere, you've had a free ride. If you've been pushing stuff into water and polluting water, then you get charged for it. But the air seems to have been free game. So I love the idea that, yes, you could face yourself being sued by another state. We don't have that issue, of course, in Australia. So that's pretty neat. But what about the general attitude of people? I mean, I was in New Zealand over the Christmas break, and I was amazed just how environmentally concerned the average Kiwi is, and the media over there as well. The environment's a big thing, whereas here in Australia, it's a bit of a chuck-away commodity. What's the attitude in the United States generally?
Well,
I know it's how long is a piece of string question.
Looking at some of the polls, it's disturbing how many people blame or admit that humans are directly responsible for the climate change that we're experiencing even this winter. Yet they don't know what to do about it because they're non-voting issues. So if my water is okay, if it's not freezing cold or I'm experiencing a drought, it's out of sight, out of mind. People don't know what to do about it. I still have to drive to work in my car. But what else do I need to do about it? And that's the thing, is that I think if this country was run so that some leader said, okay, here's what we're going to do. No more internal combustion engine, and here's how I'm going to do it. We would all fall in line and go, sure, no problem. Give me something. Give me an electric car. Give me a hydrogen-powered car. Make it affordable. I'll do it. Just put it out there. But to say, in 20 years, I think we're going to be doing this. In the meantime, we're going to have to charge you more for the gas that you're using because we haven't come up with anything better that's cleaner. And it's like, okay, fine. How many generations have we been hearing this?
Electric cars would be a start. He said polishing his halo as he drives around in his Prius or gets around on his push bike. I'm willing to develop a policy for you guys. Just ask when you need it.
Give me something. Just give it to me. We'll do it.
Get on your bike, Richard, and start cycling. Oh, you do? Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear it. Look, let's we touched on Obamacare. There was a Congressional Budget Office analysis this last week that predicted that Obama's Affordable Care Act would shrink the workforce by the equivalent of more than 2 million full-time positions. Are you across this story? How did they work that out?
Actually, that's not what the Congressional Budget Office said. That's what the media was reporting.
Right. This is what the New York Times said. Yeah. Well, what's
the
real
New
story?
York Times got it wrong. What the CBO said was that people would be reducing their work hours because they wouldn't have to work as much to get the same coverage of insurance. That's where the mistake was, and the CBO actually came out the next day and clarified that. But that's still circling the media, especially in Fox with Fox News.
Right. But I can imagine people on the right would say, well, that's not good for productivity of the nation. The fact that people are, it's the same thing, whether it's less people working or the same people working for less. The number of hours. So people are basically having to work long hours for fear of losing their health insurance, is what you're saying. And if they were getting it for free or they were getting it at a lesser price, they wouldn't have to work as hard. So I'm sure that the hard right is going to be saying, so that is bad for the economy because that means there's less hours worked as a whole. We become a less productive nation.
The hard right would say that because the extra hours that the people are working are second and third jobs. Yeah. So the hard right is saying, well, this is a good thing because we're having fewer people do more work for less money. And that's their mindset. And don't get me wrong, people in the United States work at least 40 hours a week. Now, what the hard right does, and what happens is with the employers, and why Obamacare is so good, is that an employer can hire 99% of its staff to work under 40 hours, or actually I believe it's under 30 hours, and they don't have to pay them any benefits. They don't have to cover them under their insurance. So what employers do, especially in the service industry or in the retail industry, is have 99% of its people be considered part-time. And they're not required to give them insurance. So what Obamacare does, or the Affordable Care Act, is that it provides, or there's no government providing any health insurance, but it provides a clearinghouse for people, an affordable option to getting what was heretofore high-paid insurance. I would recommend people go on to the ACA website, the government website, and there's a very simplistic explanation of actually what Obamacare does.
Right. Well, look, I'm sure
it doesn't do.
I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about it in the weeks to come. It's this whole area about how the workforce is changing is an interesting one, because I'm sure in 10 years' time there will be a lot more casual labor, which is not necessarily, in my mind, not necessarily a bad thing. It is a bad thing if employers are saying, well, look, let's try and live off casual labor as much as we can, because we don't have to pay them much and we don't have to follow quite so much regulation. But otherwise, I think, potentially it's a good thing. If that casual workforce is people who've managed to get a bit of control themselves, it can be a good thing. It's just getting the balance right. And that means you've got to have public policy to support it, to make sure that it is people choosing to work that way rather than getting abused and becoming the working poor. But look, we are soulmates, I reckon, Richard Kazimer. We've got very similar views on lots of things. I'm going to enjoy talking to you over the next few weeks. Good to have you on. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Phil. Take care.
That's Richard Kazimer on Balls Radio.
Balls Radio.